Once again, struggling with that A, aren't we? A legal studies teacher reads the news. Welcome back. I'm going to talk about something with human rights today, and it's perhaps an issue that's a little outside the square, something that not many teachers might think about talking about. And if you're a student and you want to have a topic or an issue that you're discussing that is a little different to most, then this might be something you might think about. This is from the New York Times. A horrifying headline: 1 in 3 children have unacceptably high lead levels, study says. Children around the world are being poisoned by lead on a massive and previously unrecognized scale, according to the study, a collaboration of UNICEF and Pure Earth, an advocacy group. This is by Rick Gladstone. It was on July 29th of 2020. Lead contamination has long been recognized as a health hazard, particularly for the young. But a new study asserts that the extent of the problem is far bigger than previously thought. With 1 in 3 children worldwide, about 800 million in all, threatened by unacceptably high lead levels in their blood. The ubiquity of lead in dust and fumes from smelters and fires, vehicle batteries, old peeling paint, old water pipes, electronic junkyards, and even cosmetics and lead-infused spices represents an enormous and understated risk to the mental and physical development of a generation of children, according to the study released late Wednesday. So it's this concept of lead and lead poisoning, and the study here comes to this just horrifying conclusion. The unequivocal conclusion of this research is that children around the world are being poisoned by lead on a massive and previously unrecognized scale. The study says that nearly 1 million adults a year die prematurely because of lead exposure. They say, based on their statistical works and looking at numerous universities and nonprofit groups, they modeled based on the Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation. The conclusion was that 1/3 of the world's children have blood levels that exceeding 5 milligrams per deciliter, a threshold that both the World Health Organization and the US Center for Disease Control and Prevention have determined as a cause for action. Now, this is happening in countries that are not developed. So, as it says, most children in the United States and many other developed countries have lead levels well below this. It's the developing. It's people who live in poor countries where they're exposed to lead through multiple routes. So when you're talking about 1/3 of the world's children, you're talking about a potential loss of learning opportunities, an impact on future wages, and you're talking about a tremendous burden on society. So what's going on here? What's happening with lead? Why is this a human right? So lead is a potent neurotoxin, and people have known it's been bad for you for hundreds of years. Literally, Ben Franklin wrote about it in 1786, but it's only been in the last 10, 20, 30 years that we've actually found out just how much and how insidious the effects have been. It's been linked to reductions in IQ scores for children, shortened attention span, and potentially violent and criminal behavior. So this is where an example where it's an issue that covers multiple parts of the syllabus, and that's why it's something that's really, really good if you're looking at in legal studies. To really good for you to think about, as well as raise awareness about. This is how the article ends. Richard Fuller, who's president of Pure Earth and co-author of the study, said he believed it was not just coincidence that the violence and instability in many parts of the world are in regions where lead contamination is high. I think getting rid of lead is going to reduce violence, he said. I just wonder if this might be one of the most important things. But he also acknowledged the lack of substitute for lead acid batteries. Honestly, I'd love if we didn't have these things in the world. So what's this link with violence? It's actually a fascinating concept which has been looked at before, and it's this link between exposure to lead and crime. So this is Sydney criminal lawyers talking about it. Zeb, I believe, Zeb Holmes. And a couple of different peer-reviewed studies have been published in the Environmental Health, which have found a very strong link to childhood exposure to lead and to violent criminal conduct later in life. So it's got to do with this idea of lack of impulse control, learning disabilities, ADHD. It can leave children with problems with that. And these problems make it more likely that they'll engage in antisocial behavior as adults, including crime. And they tried to look at that for kind of evidence. One of the things that they're able to do is look at leaded petrol. So once they worked out lead was dangerous and the emissions from cars were bad for you, well, when a city stopped using leaded petrol, they were able to look at the crime rate and able to take a whole bunch of other, obviously, control factors into account and see that, yes, it actually made a big difference. So, some research here, 2016 study by James Feigenbaum and Christopher Muller looked at the exposure to lead via drinking water pipe through lead pipes. They were able to do a true control study because not all cities had lead pipes, and further, lead only seeps into the water when it's acidic. Okay, so water pipes is another way they did that. The study found that exposure to lead in drinking water was linked to higher homicide rates 20 years later, relative to similar places where children avoided such exposure. In other words, they had enough data to be able to make comparisons between one city that had lead in their pipes and another that didn't, and able to make enough of a change to go, wow, this actually has an impact. This is the study that he's talking about, another study, the relationship between atmospheric lead emissions and aggressive crime. So this is in environmental health. So lead is toxic to humans. It's emerging evidence linking childhood exposure with later life antisocial behavior. This is the methods that they went into. You can have a read and pause that if you'd like. Let's just have a look at the conclusion. The strong positive relationship between childhood lead exposure and subsequent rates of aggressive crime has important implications for public health globally. Measures need to be taken to ameliorate exposure to lead, make it less, and other environmental contaminants with known neurodevelopmental consequences. So when we're looking at the human rights topic, this is certainly what we'd call an environmental right. These children in poor countries in the world surely have the right to grow up and not be poisoned by their environment, not be poisoned by the smelter factory down the road or by the cheap way that that lead batteries are being recycled, or by lead in peeling paint, and it's a huge problem. So looking at the idea of compliance and non-compliance, so are there issues in that country with non-compliance with laws and regulations, and if there even are regulations, the role of law reform. If there aren't regulations in that country about the use of these in paint, in petrol, etc., then the push to protect human rights, environmental rights, by ensuring that those happen. And then we have the effectiveness of legal and non-legal measures in protecting human rights. What are developed countries that don't have this doing to try and help developing countries, poorer countries, try and not poison their citizens through this paint? And it's actually not as simple as saying that as New York Times says, the lead levels are fine in New York Times, because a 2016 John Oliver Last Week Tonight episode looked at lead. It's well worth a watch. 18 minutes long. He goes through talking about the kind of relationship that different corporations have had with lead as a country, looking at different concepts, and basically it ends up saying the big problem in the United States is the peeling paint. The paint is cheaper, and it's been painted in premises that are rented out by poorer families, and so you've got infrastructural problems that are really, really expensive to fix, but are having a problem, having a huge kind of problem on citizens who are struggling, and we know are actually suffering due to the oversight of government and the lack of an effective infrastructural kind of spend in ensuring that they get rid of this kind of thing. And Sesame Street even did a lead kind of song back in the 70s about this. You can see this here when he refers to it. And he's trying to basically say, look, Sesame Street was talking about this, and if Sesame Street knew it was a problem way back then, why hasn't the government done anything about it? So I think this would be a very interesting topic for you to refer to when you're looking at human rights as an environmental right. You can use it as a teacher in investigating a contemporary issue which illustrates the promotion and/or enforcement of human rights. And it's not here, but remember, this says issues could include. You don't have to pick one of these if you're a teacher. You can choose your own one, and you can use lead as an example and look at the development of it, look at law reform as it gets banned in developed countries, and then look at the ongoing issue that we've seen in the New York Times of 1 in 3 children in developing worlds, in the world, so more than that in developing countries, being poisoned by the lead in the environments in which they're growing up. Hopefully, that's something that's food for thought for you and that you might be able to talk about in your HSC for the human rights topic for legal studies.